Hey, welcome to the Ignite podcast. This is Brian Bell, your host. Today we're sitting down with the founder of Hal9, Javier Luraschi. We're really excited to be talking to him today. Javier, would love to have you start us off by walking us through your journey from Microsoft research to RStudio and finally the founding of Hal9.
Yeah, for sure, Brian. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here, and we'll chat for the next few minutes and explore what we're up to in HAL9. And yeah, the journey starts with Microsoft and Microsoft Research. I worked there for a while, and while I was at Microsoft, I realized that I love startups. Just one of those things that I didn't realize that I was meant for startups. But if you look at my trajectory as an engineer and professionally, I've been moving from bigger teams like Office 365 and Office all the way to Microsoft Research and always smaller and smaller teams. Always with a love and passion for mathematics, which is what I studied back in school, as well as computer science. And I found this opportunity at some point when I was on Microsoft Research. I decided, hey, it's time to do a startup. I want a smaller team. I want to do my own thing. And while I was in the process of quitting Microsoft Research, a friend contacted me and he was like, hey, would you like to work for JJ Allaire at RStudio? They're doing software for statistical analysis. And I think most people might be like, oh, statistics, that's not fun. But I was like the opposite. It's like, oh, statistics, that's math pretty much. Like, that sounds awesome. So I moved to work at RStudio. Back in the day, it was mostly a company for doing tools for statisticians. But throughout my career there, with my time at RStudio, it transformed from, well, statisticians are really data scientists, and data scientists are really machine learning people. And wait, by the way, we're doing AI, right? So I spent a lot of time there also building packages for artificial intelligence. It's just that statisticians don't like to call them, really AI. It's just statistics. But either way, fun times there. And after being there 5 years, we decided to quit RStudio, starting by myself, and we started HAL9 to, again, help people in the data space.
That's amazing. So walk me through kind of like the genesis of that. I mean, you're working at RStudio, you're having fun. Why,
Yeah,
that's like $1 billion company, right? So why
yeah,
take the plunge? I mean, you and your co-founder met at RStudio, is my
yeah.
understanding.
We met there. Yeah,
Yeah. So walk me through kind of the genesis of
yeah.
that. I'm sure there's a lot of would-be founders sitting at their corporate jobs thinking about plotting their exit and trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to do it.
Yeah, so to be fair, I was actually planning to be on RStudio only 1 year because I wanted to do my startup. So I quit Microsoft Research and I told my wife, well, I'll do this for 1 year, and then I'll do my startup. And I liked RStudio so much that I ended up spending there 5 years, right? But at some point at the end, of those 5 years, I kind of like found out that there was like all these world of possibilities beyond what was happening on data science and machine learning. And there were a couple frustrations that myself, and I think I can speak also for Kevin and my co-founder Pedro, that one of the challenges that the data science community has, and we had at the time, and we're trying to solve with HAL9 is technical people, data scientists, machine learning people, they love coding, right? Like that's what they love to write. They love building things with Python, visualizations, transformations, and the like. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have business users, and business users, have a ton of things to do, and usually they don't have time to write code, and let alone learn it and the like. So a lot of times, what you would see on companies is that you start with something like Tableau or Power BI or whatever analytics tools. A business user creates a scratch of how the report should look like. Then a data scientist comes along and writes it off all from scratch, like with code, and like doesn't not reusing anything. And then again, like two months later, the business user comes along and then they decide to, hey, like I want to modify my Tableau report. Can you port it back from Python to Power BI or the like? So there have been like all of these frustrations that we had as technical founders, where it was pretty obvious to us that things were broken and
Yeah.
there were a ton of opportunity to improve the the current status quo, I guess.
Yeah. And I totally remember this as a PM, trying to figure out where the data is and how do I join these tables, and okay, I got to
Yeah,
go hunt down engineers to write these complex SQL queries for me. Okay, now I finally figured it out. And then Yeah, it's always that last mile of getting the data from the tables to like a chart. So kind of walk me through what Hal9 is and kind of what the vision is, and yeah, what are you guys are trying to accomplish? Because it's pretty cool tech. I mean, it's large language models connected to data. But yeah, tell the audience everything.
No, for sure. I mean, really, at the ultimate goal of the company is for you to think a data question or have a data problem, put it in text, put it out there, communicate it with Hal9, and Hal9 should be able to build you that particular answer, right? It's like, maybe here is a table, here's a chart, your data lives in that location, right? We put it all together. And so the ultimate goal is to let business users answer data questions. Pretty simple, pretty hard problem. I mean, like, how do you even start for it? Like, how do you actually get it to work? And not surprisingly, one of the tools that we're using, that we started actually using last year, way before ChatGPT and Code Interpreter and all of those tools, we started building Hal9 as a way of letting business users type a question in a prompt like, hey, what was my revenue last year, right? Or what is my churn? Or how many devices do we have in North America, etc. So basically, any data question that you can think of as a business user, we use large language models, generative AI, to generate those data analyses for the business user. You can think about it as DALL-E or Midjourney, where you can say, I want a picture of a cat flying, with a rainbow and, at midnight, right? And, magically a computer, can generate those types of images and visualizations and content. However, we don't have that technology for data analytics today. And that's what we've been able to put together and on a product, same name of the company, Hal9. And that's what we've been kind of like obsessed to iterating. And there's also like a ton
I
of
love that
work.
analogy, by the way. Like it's like Midjourney or DALL-E for your data.
That's it. That's all it is. You
It's
type it and
perfect.
you yeah, you want to get the report, and it's easier said than it's easier said than done. I don't know if you play with Midjourney or DALL-E, and they're super powerful technologies, but I think the really tricky thing is, like, the more you play with them, the more you expect from them, which is kind of like awesome, but so frustrating, right? Because I don't think we're impressed anymore now with Midjourney, and the expectations of people are like, well, but can you do videos, right? Like, what if, or like, can you make a picture with me in there? And I think we're also kind of like exploring that space with analytics, where it's, oh, cool, you can do a revenue by month, like filter by city, but like, can you tell me how to make more money, right? Someone actually asked that
Yeah.
question on Hal9, like, can you help me make more money? And it's a valid question. It's just that, okay, like, that's still like, it's setting up the bar higher, right, of what to expect from
Right.
computers and generative AI. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We're ChatGPT, and I use it for a lot of my workflows. Probably way too many of them, frankly. And it's made me somewhat more creative, I think, because I was never really a writer until it came along. And now, instead of reading stuff and like maybe Googling it and trying to find the article that I want to read, I can just basically say, hey, I want to read about, what's the startup mortality rate after
Mm-hmm.
you reach 1 million of ARR? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And it'll pull that data, start writing an outline of an article, and we can just kind of dive into that topic. And I can write an article on it and put it out on my Substack,
Mm-hmm.
instead of going and reading a bunch of other people's articles. So
Yep.
I think in the same way. I mean, the other story, of course, is my spouse is now writing children's travel books with it. Now, there's a ton of work that goes into it. It's not just Chat GPT writing the children's book and magically it like spits out the other end on Kindle and starts generating thousands of revenue per month. I mean, she has to do a ton of work into each book, but she utilizes Midjourney and things like that. So it's kind of breaking down the barriers of creation,
Yeah.
which is
Would
really
you agree
exciting.
that you had to modify your workflow, to adapt to ChatGPT or Bart or whatever, right? Like, do you feel like you had to figure out exactly what are the bits and pieces that it's useful? Because I see
Yeah,
a lot of people kind of like having on, like, just insane expectations, right? Like, oh, tell me,
yeah.
something super specific, right? It's like, tell me how to cure cancer, right? It's like, oh, you didn't answer it. Well, you're wrong, right? It's like,
Well, and
I feel
it
like
tends
it,
to
yeah,
skew positive. I noticed, right?
yeah.
When I ask it, I have to tell it to be critical. To be critical, it doesn't
Mhm.
naturally. It's not naturally critical, which is interesting. Um, But yeah, so I mean, this seems to be a pretty hot space. How do you guys differentiate? What's your kind of secret sauce, and what
Yeah.
should prospective customers know about you?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely, I would say that first of all, like the generative AI space is huge, right? So, we're exploring analytics within generative AI, but we're really not exploring image generation, right? Or music or legal, like there's many, many other things. So we're in a very narrow space within the broader range of generative AI. Data analytics is a huge space. So the good news is that we're not solving an old problem. I mean, I mentioned that I work in Office Access back in the day, pretty much the same problem, right? Like you have data in front of you and you have to answer questions. Now, to answer your question, like why are we different and how are we doing? What are we doing differently? To my knowledge, we're the only company that started with doing analytics for generative AI from the ground up. And really, what that means is that up to today, it wasn't possible to write code for doing data analysis from scratch with any technological tool. So our big differentiator when you look at established players, and I'll try not to mention the names, but like you can imagine which ones they are.
Well, yeah, like the one
Uh,
that comes to mind is like code interpreter from ChatGPT, right? I can take my data, plug it in, and start asking questions, have a conversation.
Yeah, that one is an interesting competitor, but let's just split the competitors into like the established data analytics companies, and then we'll talk about
Yeah.
ChatGPT.
Okay.
Because for the established companies, like all of them, or I would say that 95% of them, they all build their core infrastructure on top of closed source technologies. So, when you use Excel, Excel is proprietary code, and when a tool like ChatGPT goes and crawls the internet, they really don't have understanding of what an Excel file is. It doesn't, it can't really make use of that. Our company, in contrast, we're focused on generating code, and code is basically just text, right? And that's text is basically the lingua franca of large language models. And that has two advantages. The first one is that we can generate better reports because we're building from the ground up. We don't need to figure out how do we translate text to Excel or whatever, right? Like we're basically generating code, which is what large language models are really good at. And the other aspect of it, which is the one that excites me the most, is it is the only time up to this point in history of humanity, right, that we can have the business users and the technical users working on the same substrate of technology, right? The business user obviously is not going to write code, but they can use something like Hal9 to build reports. But then when the data scientist comes along or the machine learning experts and he's like, well, I want to modify that particular piece of content that the business user created, they can actually look at the code. So there's no other company out there, at least to my knowledge, that is doing analytics with code and generative AI. And I think the combination of those three is the thing that is really powerful. Now, the tricky question that you mentioned is like, well, what about ChatGPT, right? And first of all, there's a ton of competent people in OpenAI. I think any startup should be, have a good level of respect for OpenAI, not just on analytics, right? But image generation. I think they just announced that they're going to do multimodal models that support images, and they're probably going to add sounds and videos. And so the thing that is scary is that they have a ton of great people. One of my favorite people that I really enjoy following is Andrej Karpathy. He used to be the director of Autopilot. Now it works on OpenAI. So they definitely have competent people, but they're also looking at solving all the problems at once, right? Is you can use ChatGPT for, as you were mentioning, Brian, to create content, to throw ideas, to understand startups, but you also can use it to do some basic data analysis. Currently, they only support CSV files. I think they're capped to 200 megabytes or something around those lines. So you can't really use it for the same use case as Hal9, which is, well, I want to connect my database. I want to do it with privacy, like security, following the enterprise requirements of my organization. But that's not. I'm pretty sure they're thinking about like, okay, how can we expand from connecting to CSVs to databases, right? So we're gonna have a podcast probably on 6 months and be like, yep, they added support for databases, right? What's going on? So they're gonna keep moving fast.
So you're touching on something really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Which is sort of in business, you make money. James Barksdale said by bundling and unbundling. Another way of phrasing that is something like you go horizontal and then you go vertical, right?
Mhm.
So you can almost look at ChatGPT is going horizontal. It's kind of trying to do almost a little bit of everything, but it leaves open the verticalized use cases. And you see this again and again in business and like vertical SaaS, where someone comes along with a better mousetrap for some vertical. The example I usually give is like diapers.com, right? Mm-hmm. So someone comes along and says, you know what, we could sell baby goods and goods that parents need better than Amazon and or Zappos, right? And there's lots of other vertical B2B SaaS. So tell me about that. So do you believe that there's like one big large language model to rule them all, like a big 100 trillion parameter model that can do everything and just be generally intelligent and futuristic, and or is there going to be lots of little like finely tuned trained 7 billion parameter models that are really good, excessively good at particular things?
Well, the short answer is the latter. That's what I believe, but let me give you more context. So I think you're touching a very interesting point of vertical integration. It's really hard to compete with OpenAI with everything. It's like, well, they have like, I don't how you probably know better how many $1 billion they have a budget and the like. Yeah. But yeah, we're there's a ton of space for a startup like Hal9 and many others where we just want to do one thing right? Is data analytics for Hal9, and how do you save them? How do you share? How do you reuse them? Security and like boundaries. Anyway, so that's one part of it. And the more transcendental question that I think you're asking is, do we live on a world where there's a single large language model to rule them all, or do we have a ton of little ones, right? And I feel pretty confident that the answer is going to be there's going to be a lot of different ones. It doesn't mean that they're small ones. And I had this revelation a few months ago where at some point we were looking at Hal9 as a tool, right? We were talking about like what features do you add, like
it's probably the coolest name in AI, by the way. I don't know how you guys got it. Right?
Yeah, but I think that really you should think of Hal9 and many other generative AI tools as individuals. Not to say that they're people or have consciousness or anything, but like it's more like people that you interact, right? And so I really think that the future of an organization, and I don't think we're more than.
I love this. I love where this is going.
I know, right?
It's a bunch of like verticalized, AIs. That's like my accounting AI and my marketing AI.
And I think it's going to be messy and super interesting. I think there's going to be a point in time where you go and open a Google Doc, right? And you start typing, I'm Brian, like I'm going to open a startup, phone podcast, etc.
Yeah.
And then you're going to see like not just ChatGPT saying, hey, like we should add an intro section or whatever, but you're going to also see something like Hal9 that comes in and is like, I found, your data expert that says like, I found out that, companies that start with a mission statement are 13% more likely to succeed. And I think that where it's going is these are really kind of like your coworkers of the future, apart from having real people, humans interacting on the document. And it's just going to be kind of like a messy, super interesting interaction of like one chatbot commenting to the other one, doing edits, and it just comes all together in the same place. So I'm starting personally to see large language models more as co-workers and less of tools that you take advantage of, right? It's like you ask them for suggestions, they should be able to contribute. They should probably all start living in Slack and Teams and be part of all the other tools. This first iteration, obviously, like Hal9 and many other tools, you still go to the website, right, that provides it. You go to ChatGPT, chat.openai.com, or you go to hal9.com to use different agents. But I do think that in the not so distant future, everything just converges into, it's just a person that you talk about, person, quote, quote, that knows how to use email, like you find it in Slack or whatever. And then they, once you have that, you also get for free being able to collaborate between different large language models, right? So ChatGPT is going to be like, Hal9, I don't think that's correct. Can you like double check the numerical answer, right? And Hal9 is going to come up with a new one, and it's going to be like, well, that's not consistent with your paragraph where you stated that. And that interaction, I think, is going to happen. And I think it's also good for the world, and it's also good for
Yeah.
the work environment. That I'm super excited for that, but maybe in a couple of years.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I forgot to turn on my focus mode. I will do that now. That way I don't get interrupted. Well, let's talk about open source because you've been a contributor to open source for a really long time. Talk about some of the projects and sort of, what the future of open source looks like, especially around AI and, you see Llama 2 and stuff like that coming out. And yeah, tell us about.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I really got heavy into open source with when I was working on RStudio. One of the things that JJ did on RStudio was building it from the ground up on open source. And I got to see the benefits of building open source and the open source community. As I mentioned, I started working first on kind of like a statistical, the IDE of RStudio features there. But then I wrote the transition of, well, it's not really statistics, it's data science, it's machine learning. So I had a lot of opportunity there to write packages like Spark. With actually Kevin and I work on that together. We wrote a book with O'Reilly on kind of like using Apache Spark for the R community. We got a chance to work with Adam Paske, the creator of Torch, PyTorch, to build a package called Torch that is, again, for open source package for using PyTorch for the R community. And then we co-authored MLflow, the R package with Databricks and Matei Zahari and their team. So I've had this kind of like almost implicit knowledge of open source where I was, I'm not like one of those fundamentalists that say like, oh, everything needs to be open source, right? And, I don't do anything if it's not open source, but I see the benefits on the sense that, and specifically, coming back to Hal9, where you're never going to lose the computation and the work that is associated with open source projects, right? I mean, IBM and Microsoft and Amazon are big companies, and we think that they're never going to go out of business because we cannot understand, in the span of like 100 years, it feels like they're going to be around. But when you if you get unlucky or if you go beyond that, it's not really clear that we're going to be able to run code that we were able to run like 20, 30 years ago that was proprietary, right? So I do think that open source has this beautiful characteristic that it's transcendental in the sense that there's going to be a GitHub repo somewhere in there, like 1,000 years from today, and someone is going to like resurrect it and they're going to be running the open source projects. I don't think it's going to be that easy to run, proprietary software. So that is pretty interesting. And I think,
I think it was Kevin Kelly, the Wired magazine co-founder and author, that kind of made this point in one of his books, is that I think it was in What Technology Wants, really amazing book. He basically talks about how when technology never really goes away, right? It just sort of kind of drifts into the background and it gets integrated with other technologies and kind of evolves towards more complexity. And he made a bunch of really interesting points in the book, like one of which was you can still go out and buy like a Model T Ford, like the original mass-produced automobile.
Very expensive,
there's some,
right? But yeah,
I don't know how. Like, I'd love to look that up, but you can go out and literally buy a brand new Model T. Somebody is still making that technology, or vacuum tubes are another really good example, right? Although we have transistors and they're superior in every way, blah blah blah. Some people prefer the sound of vacuum tubes in their amplifiers.
So someone needs to build a large language model powered by vacuum tubes, and it would be like huge. But yeah, no, I get your point. Is technology really, as long as there's a need, it's gonna exist there, right? And that's a fair point. It just open source makes it so much easier to give continuity to these types of projects. And then if you look at it from an efficient point of view, right, is do you want to have like 10 different companies, all of them developing the same thing? That's obviously more costly. Or or is there room for refactoring the work that companies are doing into core components that are usually higher quality and can be more broadly used, right? So applying that to large language models, I think it's going to be pretty obvious pretty soon. I think that we already see the directions on that path where open source large language models are going to be to the level as OpenAI and Bart, and they're just going to keep improving, and mostly not because not necessarily because the technology is better, but like almost the economics of contributing to open source. It's just so much easier to pour money there and everyone gets the benefit versus if OpenAI pours money into OpenAI, well, only ChatGPT is going to get better, right? So I'm super bullish on open source technologies for large language models. But again, like we're at the very beginning of this expansion. It might take a few years, right? And a few years is nothing, but we'll get there for sure.
Yeah. Do you feel like, not switching gears, but just offhanded question as we think about, I was looking at large language models just sort of burst on the scene, right? Last fall. Mm-hmm. And they came out of nowhere because they were getting like 10x more complex. It's sort of like I called it L2 M2 in a recent article I wrote. But tell me about do these models keep getting 10x more complex every year, where they just take hundreds of millions of dollars to train? Like, is GPT-4 going to take hundreds of millions of dollars to train and be 10x more complex than GPT-4, or are we hitting a wall of complexity where it doesn't make sense to make them more complex anymore?
Yeah, I mean, my personal point of view is that models are going to get more and more complex and there's going to be more and more data, right? Because if you think about it, a large language model, it's also, I mean, it comes on from the name, right? On the space, generative AI, right? Like it's used to generate content, right? So there's, right now we don't see it because it's like, well, we're, it's kind of like, we're starting to use ChatGPT and, like tools like Hal9, etc. But like, we're basically going to also like 10x or 100x the content that we create as humanity, right? Like there's going to be like way more websites, way more podcasts. Some of them are going to be fully AI generated. So like in order to deal with that complexity, we're also going to need more models that understand like a bigger expanse of the knowledge. I think an interesting
I love
challenge,
that. So maybe after like my 100th episode, I'll just train a large language model to run the podcast for me.
Just do it for it. I think you're going to be competing with an AI that is never going to be as good as you, Brian. But they're definitely going to try to compete with us in a good way, honestly. And we've seen actually some of that on Hal9. It's one of the features. I can tell you about the feature that is already released, and I'll keep the other one secret. But if you go to hal9.com today, we actually already start auto-generating prompts that you should potentially ask your data set, right? So the first version of Hal9 was like plain text box. The version that we released a few months ago is like, hey, you should try these things. You can kind of like already project where this is going, where, well, why do I need to wait for a prompt to be generated if you can already generate them? Shouldn't you be creating all the reports and just just picking the best one? And can you like organize them?
It's sort of like kind of like self-directed AI, which has like a recursive evaluation loop or something like that, where it can kind of spin up its own model architecture based on the problem that you're giving it, or based on the problem that it perceives that it needs to solve. That's kind of the last mile of AI, right? Is over the next, I don't know how many years, I'd love to get your thoughts, but you just basically have these general assistants that maybe spin up the verticalized versions, the more verticalized AIs to solve the problems. But do you feel like we get kind of the slow takeoff scenario? Like the futurists talk about like a slow takeoff versus a hard takeoff, or maybe you could define what each of those are. And
I'm gonna say unpopular stuff because then you get more ratings, Brian. Even if I might get torched by the community, but I do think that we're already on a super exponential curve of improvement that is not stopping. But then I think it's Elon Musk, the one that says like every exponential curve, if you look at on the tangent, right, like on a very short time span, it just looks like, oh, it's just growing like, linearly, right? It's like no improvement. But to me, and again, this is the part that is unpopular that, maybe you'll get some comments on your podcast, but it's so fun. Like, I do think that in some ways we already have general artificial intelligence and,
in some definition of that word. Yeah.
And
I mean, it's practically already passed the Turing test, right? When it can
that's
say
exactly my point.
Yeah, I'm sentient, I have feelings, and I can fool humans, at least through a text interface,
Yeah, and to me, like somewhere around there, like I was super passionate when I went to school about the Turing test, right? It's like, oh, I wonder one day, one day maybe we're gonna be able to solve the Turing test, and like
wouldn't that be amazing? Yeah, and here we
yeah,
are.
and then but we know that we solved the Turing test because no one talks about it. It's like like now we have ChatGPT and no one is really trying to figure out.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's like we just
always
forgot
this
about
thing
the
that was in the
test.
future. It's like, oh, 2029, 20 something.
I haven't seen even
Yeah.
discussions of people arguing about the Turing test anymore. Like everyone is just like, basically the answer is like, oh, that was a bad test. Now we have a better test. And it's like,
that's not right. Yeah, well, it's a new test. We have a new test now, and as it, there's a funny graphic in like one of Kurzweil's books where there's this guy like scribbling like what AI can't do, and a bunch of things that it can do are kind of sitting on the ground. I love that image. I'll put it in the show notes if I remember. So unpopular opinion in technical circles, you're saying like probably exponential hard takeoff here.
Yeah, but I think that disagreement is, and maybe it's more from the technical side where people say, well, like ChatGPT is still not really smart, like, and they're right. I mean, ChatGPT has a ton of problems. That's why we're working on hal9.com. But when you look at it at least from my point of view, from an objective point of view, would I rather chat with a random person in the world about a topic or with ChatGPT? Is like, ChatGPT is pretty good at answering questions and being creative and all those things. Now,
I increasingly go to I have the app on my phone, and I increasingly go to that app instead of Google, right? And so which is existential for Google,
so
as other people have talked about.
Yeah, I mean that's also true. Yeah, we don't do search, but I think it's common culture right now that Google is really probably putting all their engineers' effort into figuring out this space. Because yes, like, would you rather use Google or ChatGPT or generative AI, right?
I am going to Bart sometimes because Bart is usually pretty up to date. They're doing a good job of keeping the data, usually within a couple weeks. So they're probably deploying a new model every day or every couple weeks or every week or two. And so I find that I'll go to that when I need like up to date info. It's still not as good as GPT on most things, but like when I need up to date stuff.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, and just going a little bit back between the definition of general artificial intelligence, because I do want to give acknowledgement to the community of like the amount of work that is remaining. Yeah. And to me, there was a comment from one of the creators of the Keras package, Francois Cholet. Hopefully, I'm not misquoting, but like he's the one where I found the one of the point of views that I remember noticing on his Twitter page is that it's really not about general artificial intelligence, as in this person, like has, like above or average generic intelligence, but it's really about civilization level intelligence, where you say, our AI is really smarter than civilization as a whole, right? Because if you think about it, data, scientists, you can have like a brilliant data scientist in physics or mathematics or the like, but they're not operating on their own, right? Like they have a peer review process, they use books, they have like conferences, like they brainstorm and get beers with friends and communicate. So kind of like from what I understand, Francois's Cholet's point of view is that, well, really the next level is, can we build something that is smarter than all of us together, right? And that to me is still like super far in the future.
That's an interesting, because I mean, you could make an argument because GPT-4 is trained on all of human knowledge practically at this point.
It's not that far in some ways, but like I think the saving grace is to say, well, and again, I think this would be Elon's point of view, right? It's like, well, we really need to merge with machines. I don't know if that really means putting like a Neuralink implant on your brain, or if it just means, well, just use ChatGPT and HAL9 to like interact and be more productive at work, and maybe that's the merge that we create.
I think we kind of already have, right? Like in a way, I mean, we carry around a device in our pockets that has access to all human knowledge and has more computational power than supercomputers in the 80s did.
We can definitely call ourselves cyborgs, but then
we're already kind of cyborgs,
whenever we say cyborgs, everyone thinks like sci-fi and like half brain, and it's like, no, it's not that. It's like it's a device that is connected to the entire world and has any information. And you look, I mean, I don't want to know how much time I spend in front of screens every day, but it's probably most of the day. So
pretty much like all day. I mean, 8, 9, 10 hours for work, and then you got an hour or two of shows I watch in the evenings, and then I'm also a gamer, as You can probably see from all the
What are you
gaming.
playing, Brian? I'm playing Final Fantasy 16. So good.
Are you
Your
really?
listeners should. Yeah.
Is that the online version or is there a campaign
No,
version
no,
now?
it's a campaign version. I usually don't play that many video games, but Final Fantasy is one of them that I've been playing since I was a kid, and I love playing. I think it's
Oh
pretty
man,
good,
Final Fantasy 2 and 3 on Super Nintendo. Remember
yeah,
those were
I
really
remember shedding
special.
tears watching you're watching pixels changing the screen, and they're so good. It's great. But anyways,
Yeah. No, I'm a big gamer. We're hacking our way through Diablo 3. A buddy of mine and I, in preparation to play Diablo 4. We're debating whether or not to buy Diablo 4, given the Blizzard Activision merger with Microsoft might go through any day.
mm,
And historically, the games are released pretty rapidly after the acquisition. It
mm-hmm.
happened with Bethesda. I'm also playing through Starfield. I also play like Escape from Tarkov pretty
Got
frequently.
it.
So yeah, I'm a pretty avid gamer. I play every
Out of
day.
curiosity, why does that happen? Is that legal requirements where they don't want to release games while an acquisition is happening? Is
Well, it's
that's the
because
bottom line?
Microsoft's trying to become sort of the Netflix of video games, where you pay a monthly subscription, Game Pass, and then you get access to all this deep catalog of games, and it's a very powerful bundle. Again, you make money by bundling or unbundling, right? So they're bundling up a bunch of content and selling it as a pass and making it somewhat exclusive to PCs and Xbox.
Yeah, so they want to save, I guess, the release for post acquisition, and then they can make it part of their platform. I guess. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
very
yeah. No,
smart strategy.
I'm not a serious gamer, but I'm a serious Final Fantasy player. That's all I'm at.
Did
That's
you
what
ever
I'm
play
at.
Chrono Trigger?
I did. I didn't love it
Yeah.
as much. I don't know. I just love Final Fantasy, but yeah, I did play it, and I think I went halfway through
What's
the
your sweet
game.
spot? What's the like? Is it Final Fantasy X? What was like the game you look back and you're like, that was the one for me?
Yeah, Final Fantasy 3 was definitely the highlight, and
Final Fantasy 3 on Super Nintendo.
yep, yeah, on Super Nintendo. That's
Oh,
my
that was a good
favorite
one.
with
Yeah,
yeah, Terra and Sid and Locke and all those
yeah,
great
yeah.
characters. And I thought I really liked Final Fantasy from the menu based fighting system, because like I always like
Yeah.
like just taking time to
Turn-based
make
RPG,
decisions.
JRPG.
Turn-based RPG.
Yeah.
But Final Fantasy 16 is they got rid of that, and it didn't bother me. So I don't know what it is about Final Fantasy games that
Well,
I
it became
like,
a
but
little bit more live actiony, right? Where it's kind of like
yeah,
a little bit more Dark Souls, but not quite.
yeah, yeah,
That's really cool.
yeah. It is.
Um, yeah, I love video games. Love them. I'm basically living my life like I would if I was retired.
Oh, I like that.
Investing in startups, talking to cool people about cool stuff on a podcast, and playing video
Yeah.
games.
No, I love it. No, startups are great, and obviously, I think the community is lucky to have you also, Brian. Like you've definitely helped a bunch of startups, and hopefully you'll help another. You're gonna 10x, right? The number of startups that you help every year.
We're very
No
high
pressure.
volume, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the vision for Team Ignite from the beginning, is igniting startups as a team. And
Mm-hmm.
the team now is over 2,000 people, right? So we can basically,
What?
yeah, we
I
have
have no idea.
2,000 people in Team Ignite. So we can basically connect our startups to any help they need, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of our secret sauce. It's kind of the network, and
Mm-hmm.
people sign up and they say, hey, I can help in this way, or hey, I want to partner with you in this way. I'll
Mm-hmm.
give your startups a discount for recruiting or growth consulting or whatever it is. So we have this
Yeah.
long list of partners. We have this database of exited founders. People have been there, done that. Unicorn founders, tech execs, people in industry. So that's kind of the secret sauce. Not to have a commercial here for Team Ignite, but
Hey, it's your podcast. I think
I can do whatever, right?
It's valid. You can do whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I make my own rules, my own podcast.
Exactly. Yes, you can sell out. You can put a Patreon if you want to. Anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Brian, that's awesome.
Jingle the can around, please donate.
Yeah, please donate.
No, it's funny. The
fundraising.
synthesis of the podcast is really funny or the genesis of it, because I was like, I was thinking about live streaming, because I used to stream on Twitch as a gamer. Never really made any money at it. Like, it was just something to do in COVID while I was bored.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, maybe I'd live stream all these awesome conversations I have with startups. And I was like, oh, well, wait, then why don't I do a podcast instead, so I can actually control it a little bit more and sort of edit it before it goes out into the wild. But But
You're
this
doing
is
it right. I mean, podcasts are easily convertible to text that then the large language models can come and process,
oh,
right? So you're
I'll totally be using the
yeah,
transcript to create show notes and a
you're
description. And
already you don't know it, but you're already working for our AI overlords, and you think that
we're
you're
generating right here. We are generating
yeah, content
unique content
for
for
yeah,
GPT-5 and 6
yeah,
to train
perfect. I
on,
like
and
that.
that's funny.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about, sort of a little bit back to your background too, holding, a BS in software engineering and then getting a master's in mathematics. It's kind of
I did
unique. I'd love
the
to learn about that.
I did them actually at the same time,
Oh,
and I don't know if I would recommend that to everyone. So basically, when I was in high school, I always knew that I was going to write code. I've been coding since I was 9 years old in
oh.
GW Basic, and so that one was an easy choice. It's like, yes, I
Now,
want
when
to.
you say that, a lot of people say that, but like, were you like coding every day, or like you were exposed to it and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool, and you kind of put it down for a year or two, and then kind of came back to it?
It was that actually. I don't know if everyone goes through that, but like I had months where all I do would be code every
Wow.
day, just like. But then I had periods where video games are more fun.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would disappear for like 1 year or I mean I would always code here and there, but it was nothing interesting. And then
Yeah.
like that period would fade out, and it would be like, oh, it would be really cool to create a game, right? And my goal as a kid, like any other kid or many other kids, is you know when I'm gonna create my own video game, right? Then I found out that there's other things than building video games. But yeah, so I've been going back and forth when I was as a kid on let's just do it. And yeah, like I there were days where I would just come back from school and just code, and in
Wow.
retrospect, it's kind of weird because now that
Like code
I
what though?
wish.
Like what were you so motivated to code?
Yeah, so I built it was like an everything app. It's again, there was no like product vision, like
Yeah.
if you think about it, but like it started with a little word processor because like my mom used to use Word Perfect. You maybe remember that
Oh yeah,
one,
I remember that.
and
Yeah.
it looked pretty simple to me. It's just like, oh, you just type stuff and a few comments on the bottom. So I kind of like would try to do that, but it was mostly honestly coding for fun. I spent probably like a bunch of time doing like a little intro on when you would launch the product. It would basically let the words would fly down and they would make this little sound, right, like so it was nothing really cohesive. It was, well, I want to build an intro to the software that I'm building, and then I got into doing games. And I don't know if you ever played this when you were a kid, but we used to have this game where you would get a piece of paper and you would put kind of like like boats or like spaceships on each of the sides, and you would fold it in half. And then basically the point of the game was to put a mark on the opposite side of the paper to try to shoot to the opposite side of the territory. I don't know if this makes sense, but it's basically the point was to guess where the enemy ships were, and you would play that with a piece of paper. So I was like, oh, it would be cool to put that on a like on a computer program that can generate a bunch of these games that then I can give to my friends, right? So it was kind of like hacks with everything all
Yeah.
together in a single program, mostly for fun. Nothing commercial or the like. Just I really enjoyed like building stuff, and it's one of the things that up to today I'm doing a startup and all those things. You're really not constrained by anything or anyone where you're doing a software
Yeah.
startup. You can, I mean, if you have the passion and time to do it, like you can code it, put it together, and get it done, right? So I think that's really powerful compared to say if I wanted to do like a rocket ship company. It's like, I mean, I don't think you can do it without cash, right? I mean, that's borderline impossible. While software, LLMs, generative AI, like anyone listening to this podcast can think of an idea and be like, oh, I should be able to use generative AI for X or Y, and I'm going to put it together. I mean,
Yeah.
as long as you have like, like
And
10
I'm
cents
seeing this
or
as an
$2 to
investor,
pay.
like
Yeah.
over the years, and it's really the long term trend, really, of society and technology and value creation, right? Like in 1980, I'm probably getting the numbers wrong, but the average bank took 1,000 people to run, and now
Mhm.
that same bank takes like 4 people or 8 people,
Yeah.
and so it's just a radical delaborization of businesses. And I'm
Yeah.
seeing this as an investor where I'm running into startups that have they bootstrap to 1 million of ARR with just a couple co-founders.
That's awesome. No,
Yeah,
I love that. I
and
think, yeah, that's the way of doing it if you can do it. Obviously, the work that you do and, other syndicates and early
yeah,
stage funders, like it helps a lot because, living on ramen and all of that it's also tough, but, it doesn't compare to, say, bioengineering, right? Where it's like, I don't even know, you probably know the average check size, but it must be like $20 million, right? Just to
yeah.
get started and,
It used to be 5 million
it,
just to put a .com
sure.
website together 25 years ago, right? And
Oh,
now,
really? Yeah.
yeah, now you can do
Yeah.
it basically for free or practically for
Yeah.
free. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm seeing like a pretty, um, depending on where you're at, kind of in the stack. I mean, I'm seeing some SaaS companies where they don't really have a technical co-founder, right? They're just kind of maybe a couple PMs that kind of can code, but they're hacking
Mm-hmm.
stuff together and solving problems for people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what technology is for, is to leverage humans to solve our problems and make us enable us to do more. So pretty exciting. So where do you see Hal9 in the next 5 years? Like, what's kind of the future hold for you guys?
Yeah, so we do have an infinite amount of work. So that to me is always really exciting in the sense that, even if we have a competitor that comes and is like similar features or whatever, is like there's like a super long North Star, right? And at the end to me is creating value from artificial intelligence for people. And specifically on the data analytics space, we kind of like divide the scope of the work that we support in three buckets. We talk about first descriptive analytics. That's the type of problem that is mostly solved with HAL9. Those are questions like, show me my previous revenue, where do customers live, how much do we invest in startups, what's the average, blah, 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 all those things. What do we have cooking for the next couple of years and then going to 5 years? We're trying to tackle the problem of predictive analytics. So things like, how much are the startup community gonna invest next year? How is my revenue gonna look like? When am I gonna run out of money in my startup, right? Like all those questions are future looking. And the good news is that we know how to answer those questions. If you ask a data scientist, they basically understand your problem and they write Python code with linear regressions and scikit-learn and the like. So there's a clear path to address that as features for HAL9 and our customers. The longer path for us is to answer prescriptive questions. So that's basically coming to HAL9 one morning and asking, how do I make money, right? I mean, that's a data question, right? I mean, it's like, you connected to a database, you have your customers and everything, or, or how do I solve cancer, right? I mean, in some ways, like the answer to many of the most important questions out there that we have as in business and humanity, they're data questions at the end. So like those are very, very tough questions. And I think ideally you arrive in a world where you come to HAL9 and you don't even need to type what you need. You see HAL9, and you see like, hey, I think revenue is gonna go down over the next 3 years, but I also found out that if Brian syndicates invest on startups on the post-generative AI category, it should increase revenue because I found these trends and the like. So that is completely science fiction. It's basically kind of like call it beyond general artificial intelligence or the like. And it's obviously something that no one has solved, and it's something that keeps us motivated because we know that as long as we keep making progress, we're gonna be able to keep creating value, and hopefully people will notice that and use our product and try it out and walk the path with us, which is it is also exciting to not know exactly if you can do it, right? Like I know that we can do predictive analytics. I have no idea if we'll ever do prescriptive analytics, but we're trying to kind of like
Yeah,
walk that path and eventually hopefully be there. Yeah.
love it. So why don't we do a rapid fire round? I'll ask a question and you just give me your short, quickest response that comes off the top of your head.
Deal. I'll try.
You ready? Okay. So what would you do if you had 100 million in the bank?
Higher. That's it.
What's the? I love that. Spoken like a true founder.
I'll give you my wire
I'd hire more
details
people.
on the bottom of the YouTube video. Yeah,
Which tells you, like, founders are usually they're labor constrained. It's capital.
it is.
Yeah, you're capital
And
constrained.
you get talent, and we have so many ideas, and we're all you know.
Yeah, I love that.
Definitely hiring.
What's an impactful book that you've read? One of that impacted your career or life?
Innovator's Dilemma. I recommend that book to everyone. I think I might have mentioned it to you. It's one of those things that I think every entrepreneur should read it, and any investor should read it as well. It's super old. I mean, old as in, I think, 40, 50 years old. But it actually predicts the trend of electric vehicles way before Tesla and way before everything else. So, yeah, definitely check it out.
Yeah, I read it for my MBA.
Well, not you. I mean, like the listeners.
Oh, yeah.
That you have, right?
Well, I have an
Whoever
MBA.
They just put
we read it. Yeah, I've read that a couple times probably. But it is an excellent book, and the theory is it impacts the way I think about investing for sure. If you could have dinner with 3 people, dead or alive, who would they be?
Carl Sagan, Andrej Karpathy, and Matthew Mercer. So I don't know. I mean,
I know Carl Sagan for sure. I'm a big fan. Read his books, but I don't know the other two.
Carl Sagan is awesome. My favorite movie is Contact.
Oh yeah.
Again, like they should. I read the book, and I think the book is way better than the movie. But anyways, we can have a different podcast for that. Andrej Karpathy, I mentioned him before in the podcast early on. I got to know about Karpathy because he was one of the few AI people that was doing AI with JavaScript, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And then he became the Tesla's director of autopilot, and now he's working on OpenAI. But he's super sharp, and someone to follow up on the AI community. And then Matthew Mercer, he's he has a group of D&D, a community of D&D users called Critical Role, and they started doing Twitch or YouTube, either one, both of them together. And I don't know if you've seen series in Amazon Prime called The Legend of Vox Machina. That one got started by Matthew Mercer and the Critical Role team, but it started as a Twitch stream, and I just really enjoy kind of like their personalities and point of view, and it would be super interesting to get them together. Yeah.
I love that. What's a hidden talent that you have that most people don't know about?
Honestly, I should know hidden talent. Coding. I don't know. It's just coding and more coding. Honestly, it's it's not that much of a hidden
Dungeons
talent.
and Dragons. That's probably a talent. D&D, right?
D&D. I don't think that's a talent. I mean, I also like sailing, but I don't consider myself talented on all of those things. Like I kind of like do them, and not great at them. But coding. I
love it.
Just have one.
Guilty pleasure.
Watching Critical Role. People might think that it's just like a show. Each episode is about 5 hours, and they do it every week. So I probably spend like 3-4 months.
It's just a bunch of guys playing D&D for 5 hours.
It's just that, and they're voice actors.
I've heard of Critical Role actually. Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah, you should look into it. But yeah, like it's a guilty pleasure because it's a lot of time. I don't think many people that have watched every episode out there because they're.
Oh wow, you've watched every episode. Wow, that's amazing.
I mean, over the past few years, right? But yes.
Podcast recommendation. Do you listen to any podcasts besides the Ignite podcast? Obviously.
I mean, I would very much recommend Brian's Ignite podcast, but I really enjoy the All In podcast. Chamad and friends. Yeah. I'm sure like your listeners have listened to it. I enjoy it. I think I really enjoy the discussions that they have, where not everyone agrees on every topic, and I think it's
great to have a political spectrum. That's what I really like about the show.
Even if you don't agree with their point of view, is like, well, let me listen and we'll debate. And I think that's missing. Sometimes media gets very polarized, and we only hear one side. But yeah, I'm sure there's.
And people crave for that. I think. Yeah, I never miss an episode of All In. I love it. And Jason Calacanis, and especially, is a big inspiration to what I do. Right. Reading the book Angel in 2017, and without him, maybe I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now, including the podcast. So, shout out to Jason.
You're gonna have him here right now
at some point. Yeah, like we'll have to get to probably hundreds of episodes and do a bigger deal. But
for sure.
What's the best advice you ever received?
Best advice that I've ever received. This is like I honestly, you know what? I think you just do what you love. And I don't know who gave me that advice, or maybe it was like one of those motivational, whatever. But like, if you ask me about, for instance, going after mathematics when I was in college, I couldn't decide. I don't think I finished that story, but I mentioned that I knew that I was going to code, and I always coded as a kid. But I always loved mathematics, and everyone told me don't do it. Like, what are you going to do as a mathematician? I wasn't even good at mathematics, so I'm very good at coding, terrible at mathematics. And I really do think that do what you love is how you win the game.
Yeah.
At the end, I end up working in statistics and data science and all these things that do have a mathematical foundation. But at the time, it sounds honestly like a waste of time. It's like, why are you studying mathematics? It's like, because I like it. It's like, but you're gonna work as a software engineer probably. So why are you doing it? It's like, I don't know. I like it. Are you good at it? No.
Yeah.
So I
it's
do
so
think
important.
That doing,
it's so important.
Just do what you love.
The
podcast or whatever is like, do it because you love it, or like helping startups, and then usually good things come out of that.
Yep.
So don't need to really overthinking. Just do something that you love, and you'll.
Yeah. Anytime, I think it was like Steve Jobs said it in his commencement. He's like, anytime I'd look in the mirror and I didn't want to do what I was about to do that day, and that happened too many days in a row, I knew I had to make a change. I'm paraphrasing. I think I might even got it word for word, but and it just had a profound impact on me. And I grew up poor, worked really hard, got to Wall Street. I was like, I freaking hate this. I don't like this. What am I doing? I like studying finance. In my undergrad, but I really didn't like Wall Street. And so
it's so hard to not do what you love, because there's so many constraints around society of, well, this is the type of job that you should get, or you have a good job, don't quit it, or like all these constraints that society kind of like tries to impose. And at the end of the day, like when we're old and we look back, I mean, no one is gonna care, right? It's only gonna be whatever we chose to do, and it's only gonna be whatever we decide, and I don't think it's gonna matter at that point. Just you need to make sure that you use with this time, you put it to best use for something that was good for people and that you really enjoy doing. And definitely, if you're not doing that, just quit and ask Brian for money. He'll give you he'll give you money for your
Team Ignite for money. And then final question: if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing?
That is like such a hard question, because otherwise I would be doing that. It's like that's almost like cheating, Brian. I don't know. I mean, I've been meaning to do sailing, and I've been trying to pick it up back again and all that. But honestly, I don't see myself sailing the world or just quitting it all. I don't have anything else that I would do apart from what we're currently doing.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same, because I'd already be doing it. Yeah, I love that.
Otherwise,
but that's a real privileged position to be in, I think, because a lot of people aren't. A lot of people aren't doing the thing that they want to be doing.
And sometimes it's just hard, right? Like, I remember being in Microsoft with kids and all the like, and I wanted to do a startup, but it was not the right time, right? I think if you had asked me there, it's like, oh, I wish I would be doing a startup, but like, and now it's just like, yep,
now I'm doing the startup.
Full on in. Now we need to do it. Now we need to make it work. But it's great, and definitely privileged for that. And
well, thank you so much. This was an amazing conversation. This is the very first episode. I'm honored to have you as the first guest, and really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to hearing the next episodes. I'm going to be your biggest fan, Brian, and just let's keep this going.
Thanks, Javier.
All right, take care. Bye.
Take care.